Hey friends, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Aleph, Daf 71 of Masechta Yoma. Daf 71 kind of starts off talking about, kind of continue what we've been talking about, just like the order of the different avodas and how do we know that the kafu machta, that taking out the kafu machta kind of is thrown in there separately. And then some interesting agadatas at the end of Ayin Aleph and Mud Aleph. And then we get to a new Mishnah which discusses the articles of clothing of the Kohen Hedjot and the Kohen Gadol and the threads that they are composed of. Composed of? Cheveh, let's begin on Daf Ayin Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Kodesh Yodav v'Raglav. Okay, so the Mishnah had said that after he puts on his gold clothing, his gold garments, his bigday zov, and he does olasov olasa'am, burns the emurei chatas, soyev chatas, so then he removes those. Well, he does kiddush yadayim, raglayim, removes those clothing, goes to the mikveh, puts back on his bigday lavan, his white garments, and goes back into the kodesh hakodashim to remove the kafu machta, the spoon that once upon a time had incense in it, and the pan which had coals that he made the shidduch earlier. And he removes those from the kodesh hakodashim. Tanu rabbanan v'aharon el oyel moyed. So the pasuk says that Aharon goes into the back into the Beis Hamikdash, and we want to say that this is what's right. That this is talking about taking out the kafu machta, taking out the spoon and the pan. Now, if you would just read the psukim simply, so it would seem that this was all just part of the same avoda, right? If you just look at the psukim, so Aharon does the avodah of Yom Kippur, then he leaves and he does his olas of olasa'am. So the pasuk says V'aharon el oyel moed lama ba lo hotzi esakav v'samachta. So the drasha is that actually this pasuk is a shtickle out of order. Let's go weiter shtickle. And we've seen this Gemara before. Where did we see this Gemara? Oh, apparently in 3 places. I thought it was in 1 place. On Lamud Beis. Yes. Anyways, that the entire parsha, everything's in order except for this pasuk. That this pasuk was actually a little bit out of order because if you would just read the psukim, it would sound like he would take out the kafu machta before. This pasuk is with all the rest of the avoda in the kodesh hakodashim, and then it says afterwards v'yatsa revasa solasav ola sa'am. Then afterwards he does his ola and the nation's ola, implying that all of the service beforehand, including removing the kafu machta from the kodesh hakodashim, happened before he offered olasav ola sa'am, his ram and the ram of the nation. However, says the Gemara that this is actually not correct. In fact, what happened was Aharon did all of the avodah of Yom Kippur lifnai v'lifnim, and then he did olas of olasam, and then he actually came back to remove the kaf umachta, which we know already. We already know all this. My time, how come this pasuk is out of order? Amar of Chisda says of Chisda, well, Gemire, we have alach l'Moshe misinai. That the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur does kiddush yadayim v'raglayim 10 times. He goes to the mikveh 5 times. And if we say that everything is written in order, i.e. that he basically does all of the avodas Yom Kippurim lifnai v'lifnim all at once, and then he does olas of olasa'am afterwards, well then you're only going to find 3 mikvahs and 6 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Meaning, if the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur gets to the Beis Hamikdash in the morning, and he does the Talmud Shel Shachar and the Bigday Zahav, and then he switches into, right, and then associated with that, in whatever order you're going to say it is, but meaning there was machlokes of Meir and the Chacham, I think. But anyways, associated with putting on his Bigday Zahav are 2 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim and 1 mikvah, and then he switches into his golden clothing, and then he switches into his white clothing and does all of the avodah of Yom Kippur, and associated with that is 2 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim and going to the mikvah. And if we're going to say that then he simply switches back into his gold clothing and does the elo ve'ela and that's it, and he did kiddush yadayim v'raglayim twice when he switched back into his gold clothing and went to the mikvah once, well, we have a total of 6 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim and 3 mikvahs. But we have halacha Moshe Misinai that there are 5 kiddush yadayim, there are 5 mikvahs and 10 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, not 3 and 6, 5 and 10. And therefore, how do you get to 5 and 10? Well, if you say that first he does the Tamid Shel Shachar and the bigday Zav, and then he does the Avodah of Yom Kippur, the bigday Lavan, and then he does the Elo ve'ela and bigday Zav, but then he goes back into his bigday Lavan in order to take out the Kafu Machta. So now already he has to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim 2 more times and the mikvah 1 more time. And then after that he goes back into his gold clothing to do the Talmud Shel Bein Arbayim. And with that as well there's going to be associated 2 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim and a mikvah. Well, there you have it. 5 mikvahs and 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So if we say that the pasuk from which we learn out Aharon going to take out the kafu machta from the kodesh hakodashim, if we say that that was actually after he does olasav olasa'am, and therefore the avoda in the bigday lavan are actually divided into 2. There's basically all of the avoda, and then he does the olasav olasa'am in the bigday zav, and then he goes back into the bigday lavan just to collect the kafu machta. Well, in that case we have our 5 mikvahs and 10 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. But if you say that everything is just everything happens in the way that everything is written, i.e. all of the avoda of Yom Kippur, Lifnai v'Lifnim, including Hotzas Kafu Machta, is all done together in the bigday Lavan, well then, he's really only switching from the gold to the white to back to the gold. You're only going to have 3 mikvahs and 6 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and we need 5 mikvahs and 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Everybody got that? Good, let's go weiter. Maskef Reb Zeir asks a kasha. You hear the kasha? It's a technical kasha. How do we know that what divides the avodah lifnai b'lifnim and removal of the kafu machta, how do we know that what's in between dartin is the olasu v'olasa'am? Maybe what's in between is the sayra naisa b'chutz, the kind of musaf sayra chatas. So it says Abaye, the pasuk says v'yatzav asa solaso, that he leaves and he does his ola, right? Olaso v'ola sa'am mitzir rishona of it ela ve'ela that when he leaves that when he leaves the heichal for the first time, it's to do olaso v'ola sa'am. It's not to do the and therefore it must be that what's dividing up the avoda, the avoda lifnai v'lifnim and the hotzas kafu machta is the olasav olasam and not the chatas hanaisa b'chutz. Rava Amar says, Rava Amar Kra, that the pasuk says ufashat is bigday abad. Says Rava that the pasuk says that Aharon he takes off his white clothing. Now the pasuk, we've seen this before as well. Now the pasuk didn't need to say that Aharon removes the clothing that he was wearing. But does anybody take off anything other than what they're wearing? Memele, if he's taking it off, he was wearing it. So why does the pasuk have to say that he was wearing it? It means that he already wore them before. Meaning, says Rava, this is how we know that he would wear the bigday lavan when he does the avoda lifnai v'lifnim. But apparently he was also removing clothing that he already had worn once before, i.e. this wasn't the first time that he was wearing the clothing. So says Rava, what does this mean? It's not the first time he's wearing his clothing. So it must be that he wears the bigday lavan twice. And it must be that he wears the bigday lavan when he does the avoda lifnai v'lifnim, then he takes them off and does the elo ve'ela then puts back on the bigday lavan to do hotzas kafu machta, and then later on he removes those bigday lavan when he switches back to the bigday zav for the Talmud Shel Bein Arbayim. So that's how Rava learns out that that the Hotzas kafumachta is done separately. Maskif l'Rabbi bar Rav Shila ve'ema demafsik le'b'sara naisa b'chutz. So Rabbi bar Rav Shila asked the same kasha that Reb Zera asked a minute ago, which is, how do you know that the bigday lavon wearing is divided up by the elov ela'am? Maybe it's divided up by the sara naisa b'chutz v'yotza v'asa haksiv v'yotza v'asa period. That like we quoted a minute ago, that the pasuk says v'yatza v'asa es elov es ela'am, that when he leaves the azare, that when he leaves the heichal, he does olasav olasa'am, not the first thing that he does is olasav olasa'am. He's not going to be doing the chatas hanaisa b'chutz. V'chol ha'pashikul l'nemar ala seder. Frekti Gemara, wait a second. We said lemaisa at the very top of Ein Aleph Amud Aleph. That's what the Gemara said all the way at the top of the Amud. That the entire parsha of the Avodas Yom HaKippurim is written in order, except for this one detail. That from the Psukim it would sound like the Otzas Kafumachta was done together with the rest of the Avodah L'fnai V'Lifnim. But the fact of the matter is, it was done a shtickle later, it was done after the Olas of Olasam. For the Gemara, actually, there are other things that are written out of order. If we look at the Psukim say that they burned the emurim of the Soyer Lashem and the Parachatas. It says that they burned the emurim, right? Because we already learned that we rip out the emurim from the animal and put them and burn them on the mizbeach, and the rest of the animal is burnt outside of Jerusalem. So if we look at the Psukim, it says that first they would burn the emure par v'sar, v'hadar ves parachatas v'sarachatas, and it says, and only afterwards they would take out the par v'sar to burn them. So if we look at the Psukim, first you burn the emurim of the par v'sar, and only afterwards do you schlep out the carcass of the par v'sar to burn them outside of Jerusalem. Now, Chever, that's not true. Because we learned that when would you burn the emure par v'sar? Together with the olas of olas ha'am. Meaning, in the bigday zav. After he already did the avodah l'fnai v'lifnim in the bigday lavon. Then he would put on the bigday zav, he would do the olas of olas ha'am, and he would burn the emure par v'sar. Now, we also know from our Mishnah that at the same time that the Kohen Gadol was reading from the Sefer Torah, which we said he could keep on his white garments for if he wants, i.e., it's still, it's like right after the avodah l'fnai v'lifnim when he's still wearing his white garments. He said, or he could wear his own white garment if he wants, but it's before he puts on the gold garments and does the olas of olas am. We said at that time, that's the same time that they take out the par v'sar. So it's clear from our Mishnayos in describing the Seder Hayom that the par v'sar would be taken out of Jerusalem to be burnt before the Kohen Gadol switches into the bigday zahav and does the olas of olas am and burns the emure chata. So therefore, for the Gemara, there's actually other things in the Psukim that are out of order. Because from the Psukim, it's written that first you burn the emure par v'sar and then you take out the carcass of the goat and the cow and burn them outside of Jerusalem. But the fact of the matter is, you first take out these animals to burn them, and only afterwards do you do the emure par v'sar. So, in the Gemara, lemaise, there are other things that are out of order as well. Oichid. Vilu anan tanan, and yet we learn in our Mishnah, explaining as I was just saying, haroes kohen gadol kshu kore, that anybody who sees the kohen gadol when he's reading from the Sefer Torah, which is still in his bigday lavon, in a roe par v'sar and esrafim, you're not able to see the par, you can't see the par v'sar and esrafim because it's happening toch kedei, it's happening at the same time. The same time as the kohen gadol is reading the Sefer Torah in his bigday lavon, they're taking out the par v'sar to burn it. Whereas the emuri parvisoyer are only being burned later on, right? In the bigday, once he switches to the bigday zahav and does the olas of olas ha'am. Yet in the psukim, it would seem that the emuri parvisoyer is prior to burning the carcass of the parvisoyer cheva. You hear the kasha. So it seems like there are actually a few things in the psukim that are out of order. Ema chutz mi pasuk zeh ve'elach. Cheva, you hear the teretz, right? So rather than saying that the entire parsha is in order except for this one pasuk, which refers to the Otzaas Kaf Umachta, say rather that beginning with this pasuk of Otzaas Kaf Umachta and onwards, there are things that are out of order, and there are actually a few things that are out of order. Okay? The Gemara asks a very legitimate kasha, which is, wait a second, we have a problem here. Either the psukim are out of order, or the mishnayos are out of order. We just automatically jump to the conclusion that the psukim must be out of order. In fact, the Gemara, wouldn't it make more sense to say that no, the psukim are in order, our mishnayos are out of order? Wouldn't that make sense? Amar Abaye, no, it doesn't make sense, because Amar Kra, the puzzle says ve'a mishaleach, ve'a sorif. Ma mishaleach d'mei kara, av sorif d'mei kara. You hear the teretz? That it says ve'a mishaleach, right? That when they send out the soyer hamishtalech to, cliff, drop, and it says ve'a sorif, and when they burn the parvisoyer. So it's like the same lashon, right? Ve'a mishaleach, ve'a sorif. Now, when it comes to sending out the soyer la'azazel, so that's clearly before the burning of the emure parvichatas, because if you look in the psukim, it says v'shilach, v'shilach esapar achai or something, right? Meaning, in the psukim, the sending out of the Sarah Mishtalech is divided in two. It begins talking about sending out the Sarah Mishtalech. It then talks about burning the Emure Parvisar, and then it continues Ve'a Mishtalech and referencing back to sending out the Sarah Mishtalech that we began talking about prior to the burning of the Emure Parvisar. And then it continues discussing the Sarah Mishtalech. So meaning, the point being that it's clear that the Sarah Mishtalech is sent on its way prior to burning of the Emure Par Visayir. And it says in the context of sending out the Sarah Mishtalech, it says Ve'a Mishalech. And that, as we just said, was prior to burning of the Emure Par Visayir. And when it comes to burning the Par Visayir, it says, meaning not the emur, but the carcass themselves, it says ve'a soref, which is similar to ve'a mishaleach, and just like ve'a mishaleach, we're saying is prior to burning the emur parvis sa'ir. No, yes. So also burning of the carcass of the parvis sa'ir also precedes the burning of the emure parvis sa'ir, and therefore it must be that it's the psukim that are out of order, not the mishnayos. In fact, the Gemara, Adraba Masorif Da'ashta, Mishalech Da'ashta. In fact, the Gemara, wait a second, why are we saying that just like Ve'amishalech is prior, therefore Ve'asorif is prior? Why don't we say the opposite? That actually just like Ve'asorif is after, so then Ve'amishalech is also after. So Ve'amishalech the Meikara Mashma. So the Gemara says, no, Ve'amishalech implies that it's referencing back to what it began talking about prior to the Emure Parvisa'ir. So therefore it must be that sending away the Sarah Mishtalech is prior to the burning of the Emuri Parvisayir, and therefore burning of the carcass of the Parvisayir must also be prior, and therefore it must be like our Mishnah has it, which is that while the Kohen Gadol is reading from the Sefer Torah, that is when they are burning the Parvisayir, the carcass of the Parvisayir, and burning of the Emuri Parvisayir only comes later, which means that our Mishnah is right, and the Psukim are out of order. Everyone got that, right? Good. Rava Omar, says Rava, Omar Kra, the pasuk says, Yomar Chai, that the pasuk says that the Sar La'azazel needs to stand alive. Until what point does the Sar La'azazel have to remain standing alive? Until the Shas Kapara, until the time of atonement. What does that mean? Shas Kapara, when's the time of atonement? B'Shas Matan Dam V'Sulo, period. That is, all the stuff that they do with the blood of the cow and the goat. Well, I guess really probably the goat in this case, the Sar L'Hashem, meaning that once the blood of the Sar L'Hashem has been thrown on the, by the Aron and the Paroches and the Mizbeach, all that stuff. So once that's done, so immediately you then send out the Sar Mishtaleach, and then the burning of the Emure Par B'Sar is only going to be after that. So we see that these things happen, that the sending away of the Sar Mishtaleach happens before the burning of the Emure Par B'Sar, which supports our argument that the psukim are actually out of order. Givaldik. Zok the Gemara, Osi Mishalech Mitzor Bashuk L'Kohen Gadol. Okay, if the fellow who sent away who escorted the Sar Mishalech to the cliff. So Rashi says it's the next day. So the next day he finds, if he sees the Kohen Gadol in the market, Omer Lo, he says to the Kohen Gadol, Ishi Kohen Gadol, Asinu Shlichuscha, we did your mission. Mitzvah beveso, if he sees the Kohen Gadol in his house, Omer Lo, he says to the Kohen Gadol, Mechai Chayim, that the Eibishter, Asinu Shlichusa, we did the mission of the Eibishter. So, as Rashi points out, that kilu in the market we want to give kavod to the Kohen Gadol. So we say in the lashon of like Ishi Kohen Gadol, we did your mission. Whereas if it's not in public and he's just reporting directly to the Kohen Gadol, so then he says that we did the mission of the Eibishter. Amar Rabba, says Rabba ki maftere rabbanon me'adadi b'pumpedisa, that when the rabbis would leave one another in Pumpedisa to go home, Amir Hachid, they said the following, L'chai Chayim, that the Eibishter yitin l'chachayim aruchim v'tovim m'sukanin. You hear that, friends? That when the rabbis in Pumpedisa would leave one another, they would say that may the Eibishter give you life, long life, good life, fixed life. I guess that's a good thing. Very nice. That the pasuk says, I will walk before God in the lands of life. Amr of Yehuda Zemakom Shvakim. That's a place of markets, place where there's food to buy, things that you need are available. That's a salach lefnei Hashem ba'atzos hachayim. That long days and years of life and peace they will add on to you. Are there years of life and years that aren't of life? What are years that aren't of life? Omer Belazar, Elushnoso Shaladam Hapchos Olav Mira Letova, says Belazar, these are a person whose life gets better and better. A person who maybe in the beginning of his life it was not so givaldig, but then it turns around and it's mamash gevald. And that is the pasuk of Ki Orech Yom Shnos Chaim V'Shalom Yosifu Lach. Shnos Chaim are when your life kind of comes alive because things just get so much better. Aleichem Ishim Ekra, that upon you fires I will call. Amar Brechia Elu Tamid Chacham Shedomim L'Nashim V'Osin Gvura Ka'Anashim. That says Brechia, these are Tamid Chacham, that they're like women. Says Rashi that they're very modest, they're very anvesonin, very humble, and kind of chilled out. V'Osin Gvura Ka'Anashim, but they're very mighty like men. All right. Says Rebrecha, if a fellow wants to do nisach hayayin on the mizbeach, interesting. You should fill up the throats of Talmidei Chacham with wine. Interesting. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Aleichem Ishim Ekra, that upon you, like the fires of the mizbeach, I will call. Wow, interesting. So if you wanted to be that ki'ilu, you're doing nisach hayayin on the mizbeach, so just give a lot of wine to Talmidei Chachamim. Givaldik. If a fellow sees that his children are not learning Torah so stark, Yisad bas Talmud Chacham, so then he should marry the daughter of a Talmud Chacham. Shenemar, as the Apostle says, Yaskin Baritz Sharsho v'Afar Yomus Gizo, that if his roots are getting dried out, so Miriach Maim Yafriach v'Asa K'tzir K'monata. What's that pasuk? Oh, there it is. Oh yeah, v'Asa K'tzir K'monata. Okay, I think I read it more or less correctly. Anyways, so Miriach Maim Yafriach. So if you just even just the smell of water, kilu, a little bit of water, a little bit of shtickle, b'nei Torah, so then it'll just bring those roots right back to life. So if you see that your children are not so stark with the learning, so just marry the daughter of a Talmud Chacham, and then just like that, they'll come right back to life. Okay. V'yom Tovaya oselo ahavav, and then the Kohen Gadol would make a Yom Tov for his friends. Tana Rabbanan Ma'aseh b'Kohen Gadol echad shotzim mibeis hamikdash. So there was once a story with a Kohen Gadol who left the Beis Hamikdash after doing the Avodah of Yom Kippur. Vavu azle kuli ama basrei, and everybody was following him. Keilu, right? The Kohen Gadol just finishes the Avodah of Yom Kippur, and there was a big crowd. Kim the Chazyun hu the Shmai v'Avtayon. But when the crowd saw Shmai and Avtayon, the Gedolei Ador, shavku l'didei. So they left the Kohen Gadol and went Bazle Basar Shmai v'Avtayon, and they went to Shmai v'Avtayon, and then Shmai v'Avtayon went to the Kohen Gadol, and they got together. And so for Asu Shmai v'Avtayon le'ivturim minei the Kohen Gadol, and then when it was time for Shmai and Avtayon to leave the Kohen Gadol, Amr Loen, so the Kohen Gadol said to Shmai v'Avtayon, Yesun b'nei Amamun l'shlam. May the people of the nations go in peace. It was a shtach. It was a jab against Shmai and Avtayon, because Shmai and Avtayon seem to never, even though they're Shmai and Avtayon, the Gedolei Ador, the Zugis, they seem to have never been able to waive the fact that they're converts. I mean, it's just follows them everywhere they go. So crazy. They can never prove themselves. The Gedolei Ador, the Zugis, Hillel HaZaken learned and froze himself on the roof of Shmai v'Avtayon to learn from them. And yet it feels like every time Shmai and Avtayon come up in the Gemara, it has something to do with the fact that they come from Sancherib. That it's unclear if either they're converts or they come from converts. They can never seem to shake that. Anyway, so the Kohen Gadol says, I guess he was a shtickle insulted that everybody left him and instead went to Shmai and Avtayon. And so he says to Shmai and Avtayon, may the people of the nations go in peace, i.e., you're converts. Amrulei, so they responded to the Kohen Gadol, you know what? Yesun b'nei Amamun l'shlam de'avdin uvda de'aharin. Sure, let the people of the nations go in peace. But these people of the nations who act like the way that Aharon would act, v'lo yesun bar Aharon l'shlam de'lo avid uvda de'aharon. But may the children of Aharon not come in peace, or rather than refer to the children of Aharon coming in peace, who don't actually do like the ways of Aharon. They said, I'd much rather be from the nation, the Bnei Amamin, the people of the nations who actually do like Aharon, like our legacy, much rather than be the technical children of Aharon who don't actually act like Aharon. Wow. All right. I hear that. Says the Mishnah, Kohen Gadol mishamish b'shmona kelim v'ahedje ba'arba givaldig. Of course, we know this, but here we see the Mishnah says Kohen Gadol wears 8 garments, Kohen Hedget wears 4 garments. The 4 garments of the Kohen Hedget are the ksones, the tunic, the michnasayim, the gatkis, umitznef is the hat, the avnet, and the belt. Most of all of Kohen Gadol, and then the Kohen Gadol has the additional choshen ve'ephod me'il v'tzitz, the breastplate and the apron and the me'il, which is like this cool tcheles thing that goes over the tunic. Maybe the me'il is taka tunic. The other thing is clothes, shirt, robe. V'tzitz, as well as the gold tzitz that goes on his forehead. Be'elu nishalim b'urim v'tumim, and when the Kohen Gadol needs to ask something from the Urim V'tumim, which is like a way to ask things from God. Now the Urim V'tumim, I believe, were only in the first temple, not the second temple. So he would wear all the shmona begadim if he had to ask something from the Urim V'Tumim. And now you don't just ask from the Urim V'Tumim for any Tom, Dick, and Harry. You ask from the Urim V'Tumim if you are requested to do so from the king, from the head of the Bezdin, or somebody that is needed for it, that it's necessary for communal needs. Very, very interesting stuff. Tana Rabbanan says the Gemara, that any of the, when it comes to the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash, a number of Beis Hamikdash or Mishkan, a number of them in describing the fabrics that they're made out of says sheish. Now sheish, I believe is linen, but we're saying that whenever it says sheish, it also means that each one of the threads was made up of 6 sort of fibers, 6 like sub-threads. Chutan kaful shisha. Mashzar shmona. Now if it says mashzar, now often it says sheish mashzar, but if it just says mashzar without sheish, so then it is, each thread is comprised of 8 threads. Now, based on that calculation, me'il shnei masar prochas esim v'arba choshen ve'efod esim v'shmona. Based on that, reality, calculation, that meaning being that each thread was comprised of either 6 or 8 threads, so then it turns out that the me'il was composed of 12 threads, because it was basically 2 threads of 6 times 2. Parochas esim v'arba, that the parochas, the curtain in the Mishkan, was made out of 24 thick threads, choshen ve'efod esim v'shmona, whereas the breastplate and because I think it was at the back of the breastplate, or the setting for it, and the apron, their threads were 28 thick. Chutan kaful shisha minalan frekti gemara. How do we know that whenever it says sheish, that they're going to be made up of 6 threads? The pasuk says vayasu es aksones sheish, that they made the tunic sheish, v'samitznefes sheish, the hat sheish, v'parimigbaos sheish. I don't know, what's a parimigbaos? I feel like it has to be the gartel, the belt, because like that's the only one that's missing by process of elimination. But I feel like parimigbaos is also like the mitznefes. Why would say mitznefes twice and not the gartel? I don't know. V'asmichn say abad sheish, as well as the gatkis habad sheish. Bad is linen and sheish is linen. So basically it says linen sheish zom mashza. So chamisha kroy ksive. So basically it says linen 5 times in the pasuk. Right, again, let's read it again. V'yasos aksonas sheish, that's once. V'samitznefes sheish, that's twice. V'esparimigbo sheish, that's a 3rd time. V'esmichn say abad. Bad is linen, which is, so that's the same thing as sheish, so that's 4. Sheish mazar, which is 5. So chamisha kroy ksive. Chad legufa dikitana ne'avu. So one is to teach us pashit linen. Okay. V'chad she'echutan kaful shisha. One of them is to teach that each thread is comprised of sheish, of 6 threads. V'chad she'ushuzurin, one that they should all be spun together. V'chad l'shar begadim shalonemar b'en sheish. One is to say, and all the other garments where it doesn't specifically say sheish, their threads are also made up of 6 threads. V'chad la'akev, one to say that's ma'akev. You got to do this. If it's not 6 threads thick, it doesn't work. My mashmadai sheish kitana hu. How do you know that sheish is linen? Amar Yosi Brab Chanina de Amar Kra bad. That when the pasuk says bad, davra olet min akarka bad. That bad is something that comes out of the ground in like one stalk at a time, which I guess is linen. Ve'ema amra. Why don't we say that maybe it's wool? That wool is like, individual threads. Amra if tzule miftzila. Well, the wool of sheep, it can split in half, and we don't want that. Kitana nami if tzule maftzil, but linen can also split in half. Kitana agav lakuse maftzil. Well, linen only splits in half, I guess if you beat it, then it splits in half, but on its own it doesn't. So therefore it's linen. Alright. Ravina Amar Me'acha. Ravina says that we learned it out from here. Pari pishtim yu al rosh michnase pishtim yu al mosne. That the pasuk in Yechezkel says that the Kohanim would wear hats of linen, and they would wear gatkis of linen. So we see that that these garments are made out of linen. Amar the Ravashi, Amikamida Asi Yechezkel man Amar. To which Rav Ashi says, wait a second, how can we learn out from a pasuk in Yechezkel that the bigday kehuna are made out of linen? What about prior to Yechezkel? What did they do? We can't just say that we know that the garments of the Kohanim are made out of linen because there's a pasuk in Yechezkel. What about up until Yechezkel? What did they do? So the Gemara says, wait a second, but that's not necessarily such a stark akasha, because Hada Amar of Chizde, that which of Chizde says that the following statement we don't learn from the Torah Shebechsav, rather we learn it out from, we don't learn it out from the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, we learn it out from Yechezkel. That the pasuk says that any Kohen who is a nudnik or doesn't have a bris milah, so cannot serve in the Beis Hamikdash. That's a pasuk in Yechezkel. What about before Yechezkel? How do we know that nudniks and people without bris milah are not allowed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash? Rather, halacha l'Moshe Misina. That's how we know that a nudnik and a person without a bris milah cannot serve in the temple. And guess what? That's also how we know that the garments of the Kohanim are made out of linen. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. But we have a pasuk in Sefer Yechezkel that's an asmachta, that we can say like, okay, look, you see, it even says in the pasuk, but that's not why we do it. We do it because it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. There's a nice pasuk in Yechezkel that kind of backs us up. But prior to Yechezkel, they were doing it anyways. So here also, Kilu, we know that the garments of the Kohen Gadol are made out of linen because it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Mashzar shmona min alin. How do we know that when the pasuk says mashzar, only mashzar, not sheish mashzar, but just mashzar? How do we know that it's made out of 8 threads? The pasuk says, "Vayasu al shulei ha'me'il rimoni tcheles v'agam v'solashani mashzar." That zok the pasuk that at the bottom of the me'il of the Kohen Gadol there were these pomegranates that were made out of tcheles, turquoise wool, v'argamon, scarlet wool, v'tolashani, and red wool, I think. Mashzar, that were all woven together. Now mashzar, so there's 3 types of threads of wools, and it was mashzar. How do we know that mashzar means that each one was made up out of 8 threads? So 8 times 3, 4 would be 24. We'll have mashzar miparochas, because we have a gzer shava that it says mashzar by these pomegranates at the bottom of the me'il of the Kohen Gadol, and also it says mashzar by the parochas. And we know that by the parochas it was a total of 24 threads thick, because each thread was 6 by the parochas, and there were 4 types of threads, so that's 24. So af kan esem v'arba. So therefore also when it comes to the pomegranates, we're saying that the threads were 24 thick, and since by the pomegranates there were only 3 types of wools, so then 24 divided by 3, memele, would mean that each thread was comprised of 8 threads. But why don't we learn it out from the choshen and the ephod? Because it says mashzar also by the choshen and the ephod. And why don't we say that just like by the choshen and the ephod, each thread was 28 thick, so why don't we say that by the what are we talking about again? Can someone remind me? By the pomegranates, each thread was, or why don't we say it's going to be a total of 28 threads. The Gemara is going to say, well, how do you do the math? So the Gemara says, well, it doesn't say gold by the pomegranates, right? The pomegranates don't have any gold in them, whereas the choshen and the ephod do have gold in them. Adrabah, done in beged mi beged, lafuke parochas the oalu. But then the Gemara says, yeah, but I would prefer to learn out the pomegranates, which are at the bottom of clothing, from the choshen and the ephod, which are clothing, rather than learn out from the parochas, which is like a tent covering, like part of a building, part of a tent. Eladanan me avne. So rather, says the Gemara, you know how we learn out that the threads of these pomegranates at the bottom of the me'il were each 8 threads thick? Because we learn it out from the avnate, from the gartel of the Kohen. Vidan in beged v'davar shelo nemar bozav mibeged v'davar shelo nemar bozav, and both the pomegranate as well as the gartel are clothing, and neither one says anything about gold. Rather than to learn out the pomegranates which don't have any gold in them from the choshen ve'ephod which do have gold. So therefore, we're going to learn out the pomegranates from the gartel, from the avnate, and just like the avnate is made out of 24 threads total, so also the pomegranate is going to have 24 threads total, and since there are 3 different types of wools in the pomegranate, so 24 divided by 3 is 8, so each thread of each type of wool is comprised of 8 threads. Rav Mari Omar, Rav Mari had gesagt, Taisenu ksiv, the pasuk says by the choshen Taisenu, make it, Taisenu lazev lo la'acher, make it like this with 28 threads only for the choshen, and I guess also for the ephod, I guess it says separately. But meaning don't learn out anything else from the ephod, from the choshen at least, right? Meaning don't learn out pomegranates from the ephod, from the choshen. Just the choshen was the way it was. Don't learn out anything else out from it. Rav Ashi Omer says, Rav Ashi v'asisa ksiv, shiyu kol asios shavos, that it says, where does it say this? V'asisa, by the pomegranates, it says v'asisa, you have to make it that everything about it should be consistent, should be symmetrical, the same. And if you want to learn out the pomegranates from the choshen ve'ephod, now the choshen ve'ephod were 28 threads total. Now the pomegranate was made up of 3 different types of wool, so you're going to have to divide in 3. How can you divide 28 by 3 and get an even number? How are you going to do it? If you say that each type of wool was made up of a thread that was 10 threads thick, well, then that's 30. We would theoretically be looking for 28 if we're comparing it to choshen and the ephod. And if you're going to make 2 of 9, so 9 times 2 is 18, and then 1 of 10, so that's how you get to 28. But but it says vasisa that we want everything to be uniform and them all to be the same. Therefore, it can't be that we're learning out from choshen and ephod just because it would be impossible to do the math. Therefore, it makes much more sense to say that we learn it out from the avnate, which is 24 threads, and so therefore the pomegranates are going to be 24 threads made up of 3 different types of wool. Divide 24 by 3, you get 8. Each thread is made up of 8 sub-threads. Chavre, that was daf Ayin Aleph of Masechta Yoma. Woohoo! Fun stuff, right? Right. So the daf began talking about the Kohen Gadol coming back in to the kodesh hakodashim to remove the kaf machta, and that is after he does the olaso ve'olasa'am. We said that, right, that if we look at the psukim, that particular pasuk is shtickle out of order because it looks like it would be written with the rest of the avoda lifnai v'lifnim, but the fact of the matter is that actually the elo ve'ela olaso ve'olasa'am actually divides, or elo ve'ela divides that in half, kind of splits the avoda lifnai v'lifnim in half. So he starts out with the bigday lavan, then he switches into bigday zav to do the olaso ve'olasa'am, and then he switches back into the bigday lavan to remove the kaf umachta. We then had said that actually there's other things that are actually out of order in the psukim there, because if you look at the psukim, so it says that first you burn the emure parvachatas, and only afterwards you send away the sari mishalech and burn the carcass of the parvachatas. But the truth is that you actually burn the carcass of the parvachatas first, and then you burn the emure parvachatas. We had some interesting agaritas there. And then we got to a new Mishnah which says that the bigday kehuna of the Kohen Gadol are 8 garments, whereas the Kohen Hedget is 4 garments. And then we just learned out like the different threads, whether they're 6 thick or 8 thick. So that was daf Ayin Aleph. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.